Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Institute for Personal Development, where total consciousness is the new frontier. Kriya Yoga is the union of the individual with the divine. Join us as we explore the practices that initiate this process.
Good morning. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. Let's talk consciousness. I am your hostess, Lisa Winton, and with me is Kenny Toy, also known as Swami Jayananda, founder of Institute for Personal Development, located here in Hampton, New Hampshire. Good morning, Swami. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing well today. How about you?
I'm doing wonderful as usual. Thanks for asking. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in. Today on The Voice of Yoga, we'll be talking about individuation, a term coined by Carl Jung. Swami will explain how Kriya Yoga with the divine can become the manual to go from knowing to doing, the how-to step-by-step procedure to separate from the unconscious pattern we are born with and initiate a process to become a whole person with a unique talent and collective purpose. The one-size-fits-all solution to many of the common problems most of us are struggling with today. Listen as we explain why most adults today are still seeking approval in their decision-making as opposed to doing what they really want. And Swami, I think that might be something that a lot of us struggle with is this innermost desire to want to be unique, do something special. I hear all the time people saying, I wish I had done this. I wish I was more like this. And why do you think that we struggle with those types of thoughts and feelings?
The biggest barrier comes from fear. That's pretty much what drives our existence today. It's like we talk about, our bodies live in fear. That's what drives the body, is preservation and survival. We're basic primal organisms. We move towards what we want. We move away from what we don't want. That's why in Kriya Yoga it's so important to understand that we are complex beings, that there is something that is within us that's of an animal nature. There's something that's within us that is of a human nature. And there's something that's within us that's of a divine nature. And the driving force behind the animal nature is all fear. And that was where humans at some point, I like to think anyway, figured out that we had to separate from this pattern that we come in with. See, because as infants, we need mom and dad. If somebody out there does not like you, then you are going to expire. That's just the bottom line, because you cannot fetch or fend for yourself. But if we are in our teens, our 20s, our 30s, our 40s, our 50s, our 60s, and we're still secretly seeking approval in decision-making, then something isn't keeping step with our development. And that's what Kriya Yoga is all about. It's about initiating a progressive cycle. And this does not happen by itself. That was the thing that the alchemists really were pretty clear about, that if we lived instinctually by thinking, breathing, eating, sleeping, and fornicating, we survive, but we don't grow. That in order for us to grow, there had to be a departure from instinct and appetite. And that was when they started laying out points of passage with rites of passage. Because it's not that easy to separate from this pattern. Our bodies do not want to let go of the jurisdiction of our sense of self. And so that's why Kriya Yoga is a path of action, it's a path of knowledge, it's a path of devotion. Because there's a plan, there's a way of doing this. There's a way of utilizing the forces that are available to you at a given time to unlock and initiate this progressive cycle. And that's one of the things I find that's missing in our socialization, is that we no longer have any leadership. so the average person today is just chronologically aging, but psychologically, spiritually remaining in this underdeveloped state. And like we keep talking in these shows, that we have options. We can survive or we can grow, and by comparison, neither one is easy, because survival-based motivation has a kickback that will start to manifest itself as symptoms of guilt, shame, anger, resentment, blame, emptiness, and boredom in our inner environment. But growth-based motivation requires a system. You have to take responsibility for your own development. And you're going to need a path of action. You're going to need a path of knowledge. You're going to need a path of devotion in order to do this. Because creation does not reveal its secrets to an unworthy opponent. Mm-hmm. Growing psychologically and spiritually is not for the faint of heart. Let's put it that way. Mm-hmm.
I remember reading years ago, like when I was in my 20s, that the subject matter was, the author was answering this question, why are we here? A lot of people want to say, why am I on this planet? Why am I here? And then he went on to describe why these are the reasons why people struggle so much, because they don't understand what their purpose is to be on this planet, to live in this time. And he responds by saying, our jobs as human beings is to recognize, A, that we are of spirit, and B, our purpose in life is to be the best expression of spirit that we can possibly be. And he was talking, then about, expressing yourself in your own individuality, which I think kind of turns into what we were saying. Of course, I think we have a much more broader explanation for that. But how do you feel about that? That he says that the reason why we're here is to express spirit.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. And the whole thing about it is that the interplay between matter, mind, and spirit is typically an ongoing struggle for all of us. And the whole thing of being able to become an individual really requires us to separate from our attachment to the outside world and rejoin with this invisible, intangible source of sustenance. In fact, that's the only way that it can happen. Otherwise, for the most part, we are making all of our decisions based on what we think other people really want us to do. Mm-hmm. We're still looking for external reinforcement. But one of the things you have to understand is that a lot of this stuff is not just academic and intellectual, but there's a lot of physics that's involved in this. The whole thing of literally rebirthing your body in this concealed deity, in this invisible, intangible source of sustenance, is what initiates this progressive cycle. But when we do that, then of course the term was called, you get God's help. There are certain benefits that come with separating from your attachment to the visible and tangible sources of sustenance and reconnecting to this invisible, intangible source of sustenance. And of course, the physics of that is like attracts like. So when we're drawing from duality, which is fear and limitation, that's what we become. Now, when we draw from spirit, which is truth and wholeness, that's what we become. And so basically what happens with that is that your identity starts to transcend the limits of just seeing yourself as a separate entity. And with that comes a sense of connectedness to a greater whole, which then links you to this sense of purpose. So it's kind of like what came first, the chicken or the egg? Like, do you get your purpose, or do you have to make your connection? And for me, we really have to separate from our attachment to the outside world and attach to this invisible, intangible resource of sustenance. And then with that comes all the benefits. To me, that's how I envision it, and it kind of makes it a whole lot easier to do it.
I was thinking, you know how we talk about what we put out is what we get back, and I was thinking about how we label people. For example, like, oh, gee, this person is, extremely unorganized, or this person is this way, this person is that, or do you think that we put ourselves in kind of a trap when we either label people or label ourselves? Because doesn't that kind of stunt our ability to show how unique we are? Because we are very different people. And if we start recognizing the uniqueness in the world around us, then we can therefore recognize the uniqueness within ourselves.
Yeah, but I mean, it's not just about acceptance either. That, today we kind of conform to the herd mentality and strive to be like somebody else rather than really try and figure out who am I and what would my life look like if I was doing exactly what I want to be doing. And then, of course, being able to follow procedure, that everything in this world has procedure. There are methods of doing things that will accelerate the return that you put on your efforts. And so a big part of this individuation process is really learning one procedure. If you can figure out how to do one thing in your life, then you have a template and you have knowledge that is transferable and applicable to anything or everything. But this whole thing of becoming an individual and being able to be sensitive enough to hear the call, but at the same time strong enough to walk a solitary path. Because if you do not have this internal connection and you are still secretly seeking external reinforcement, then it will undermine your ability to stand alone. That you will shrink back in fear and you will immediately go back to what was safe, familiar, comfortable, and known to you. But if you have the benefit of internal support, with that comes calmness, confidence, clarity. And there's no need for approval at that level, if that helps at all.
So you're saying we basically have to accept ourselves also the way that we are. Like if we're not a particularly jovial person, or if we feel we're too serious of a person, we have to kind of embrace the way that we already are, because within that we'll find our own sense of uniqueness.
Well, we're trying to optimize ourselves and developing ourselves so that we don't cop out. We don't want to use your practice as some sort of cloak to hide underdeveloped, awkward aspects of ourselves. That, when you are embarking on this practice, that you really have to cultivate yourself in all the departments of your life in order to develop this concept of a full personality. And sometimes things that are more difficult for us to work with, we have to put a little bit more time into it, rather than just, that's not me, kind of a thing. To say that this is who I am, because we're always looking to improve and move forward. And if there are awkward areas in our lives, even say for example our health, when you start enlisting these strategies, am I thinking right? Am I breathing right? Am I hydrated? Am I nurturing myself with good food? Have I eliminated foods that are producing cravings and disturbances? And am I exercising right? Now, of course, when you're following things and you're doing the very best you can, and you're still not getting results, that is when I employ the serenity prayer. You change the things you can, you accept the things you can't, and you try and know the difference between the two so that you don't get bogged down or totally frustrate yourself.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, but I think what we're going to do is we're going to pause for a moment to hear a word from our sponsors. So listeners will return shortly. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat.
If you are looking for a Samadhi-based experience, IPD Kriya Yoga has the goods. A complete yoga program that includes the practices and the process. Starting with the separation from mother, including the labors and tasks of the hero and the return as a whole person. Practice makes perfect only when practice is whole. Kriya Yoga is a path of action, knowledge, and devotion. Samadhi, or total consciousness, is experienced by knowing and doing with devotion. Call or click now and get started. 603-929-0303 or www.ipdtransform.com. Namaste.
Well, welcome back. For those of you just joining us, you're listening to The Voice of Yoga, and we are talking consciousness. And usually about this time, Swami, I know we have some callers out there. I like to open up to see if anybody has any questions. So we're going to open it up. So listeners, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and speak anytime and ask your question to Swami. Hello? Did you have a question for Swami today? No, Swami, I don't think that we do, so I think we'll continue on because I actually have another question for you as well. So we're talking about trying to create this sense of uniqueness, and during the break I was thinking about the use of the labyrinth that we talk about and that we use on our Series 2 classes on Thursday night. How can the use of the labyrinth help us to understand our own uniqueness, but also to help us catapult our level of uniqueness in regards to Kriya Yoga?
Well, I think it does it on a number of different levels. For one, it kind of gives you a template for knowing yourself in the way that you're created, because you're looking at all of the different facets of your mind. You're looking at all of the different departments of your life. A lot of us try and build our lives left to our own devices. So we get preoccupied with certain departments, and maybe there is neglect in others, which then becomes the origins of our diseases, which is imbalance. So the labyrinth gives you a template so that you don't neglect any area in your life, and energy follows mind. So if you are proactively dispatching energy into departments in your life, then of course you will affect the balance. And that's probably one of the things that you'll start to see also, is that in the process of yoga, first we divide and conquer, then we unite and stand. Because once you break everything down and you start to see that there are these different departments in your life, facets of your mind, then what actually starts to happen is that effortful work of concentration then moves to another phase in development, which is where all of a sudden you start to expand the conscious mind.
So by using that tool on a daily basis, you're saying it can help us grow psychologically and spiritually, but we still have to use our minds and our bodies to get us to that particular level. We still can't go forward until we bring the body into play as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Without the internal connection, without the conversion of changing what it is that your body is longing for, then nothing really happens. And that's across the board. That's why in the first stage of yoga, yama, your fifth yama is brahmacharya, carrier of Brahman. That you've got to get this image in your body. And without that, then actually, nothing really happens. Then there's a big difference between what I call a secular practice of yoga as opposed to a spiritual practice of yoga. You could be doing the exact same things, but the change is you're at a different level of consciousness, you're at a different degree of awareness. And I like the way it was said in the Bhagavad Gita that the sum of the habits determine your nature. Now, it's important to understand that we have different options for what our nature is going to be. If we are attached to particles, we will be of a lower animal nature. If we are attached to waves, we will be of an equally low human nature. But if we are attached to this void or this nothing, this tree of life, this life force, then we will be of a divine nature. And, of course, that's your optimal position of performance. That's what makes everything happen. That's what yoga is. It's this reunion with this source of sustenance.
I want to ask you a question about the birth charts. So just like there's no two fingerprints and there's no two snowflakes alike, there's no two human beings that are alike, am I correct in assuming that there are no two birth charts that are alike? So that in itself, we have our own, we're born into our own set of uniqueness as well.
Yeah, that would be an interesting thing to try and figure out. But I would have to agree with you. I mean, I don't know if it is possible for two people to be born at the exact place at the exact same time. So if you really were to cross-examine that, you would be 100% right. Even twins, they're born in the same place, but usually it's a different time. And so, or even say, for example, born at the same time, but even in a different bed would have some sort of variance on that. If you were really treating this as an exact science, there are, I know, what they call time twins, people that have very similar charts. And again, the things that we bring to the table is my level of consciousness, my degree of awareness. That's one of the things I always say. I can't look at a person and say, this is your level of consciousness, this is your degree of awareness. I can look at the chart and we can have dialogue, and maybe once we have a better understanding of how much of this you have identified with and assimilated, that would give me more clues as to what your level of consciousness, your degree of awareness is. And again, coming back to the chart can be helpful especially when you're marking out our points of passage and our the rites of passage for an individual, because we all have certain strengths and challenges that we come in with.
Thank you, because I was just curious to see that that's just one more tool and one more aspect that we can use to understand that we are individuals, but it's also a tool to at least help us understand where we've come from, under what circumstances, planetary anyway, and how that can help us move into a certain direction for our growth and development.
Yeah, I agree with that. And again, but by the same token, if you had a good metaphysical or mystical system without a birth chart, you could probably do quite well with that as well. That to me, I think the chart can give us helpful insights and information, but it's really when you undertake this process that you actually start to take responsibility for your own development, and you move forward with this conversion of literally finding your true nature. I've always liked that statement that people throw out in the spiritual community, that whole thing of realize your true nature. And without unpacking that and really understanding that's a pretty difficult thing to grasp if you don't know what your true nature is. And just like we learned, like in the religious communities, say, for example, the brilliant words of Jesus Christ, love the Lord thy God with your heart, your soul, and your mind. Well, the two things you got to figure out is, what is God? And what does it look like when I love God with my heart, my soul, and my mind? And once you've figured out those things and you start to enlist them, then, of course, matter and mind come together with new information, and that's where I think you get the biggest boost from the connection. And then, of course, if you are more detailed oriented, a birth chart can just help you maintain that practice, that process, because it really requires you to be more organized and much more proactive with your process.
So I guess it's about that time we have to start closing down our program today. It went by pretty fast this morning. Great content. Thank you, Swami. So I'd like to invite you listeners out there to, please visit our website. You can follow Swami on Pinterest and Twitter, of course, Facebook as well. And also available to you listeners are the online classes that you can access through the website. Just click on the link for the online classes, and that will direct you to Powwow, and from there you can make your class selection. But keep those comments, questions, and curiosities coming, because someone does enjoy hearing from you. And be sure to tune in next week. We're going to be discussing knowledge and Kriya Yoga style. So, any final thoughts or comments about our content today or our show next week?
Well, I would like to encourage people to celebrate their uniqueness, because I think socially, especially with all of this kinds of cosmetic work that we're all doing, trying to become something other than what we are naturally, that to just kind of settle in and enjoy who you are and recognize that the forces that are really important to you are readily there for you, so that you do feel good enough. And it's not just being in denial or being aloof, and that you do have the benefit of internal support, which allows you to celebrate your differences. And with that, I'll wish everybody a good day. Namaste.
And thank you for listening to our program, The Voice of Yoga. This is Lisa Winton, along with Swami Jayananda, signing off. Have a wonderful Kriya Yoga kind of day. Namaste.